This podcast is for women who are already established, women who know they're capable, but can feel the gap between who they truly are and how they've been operating. This is a show about power, identity, and the exact shifts that elevate how you lead, decide, and sell without performing or chasing or molding. I'm Dr. Sonia Adrovich. This is I Have a Story for You.
I started my business with a lot of determination and excitement and passion. So, in order to make this work, as it was so important to me, I went all in. I, from the very beginning, hustled really hard, and I very much embraced that. I embraced it not just because that's what every uber successful person said that it took, and I took a look at you know what Tony Robbins was doing, what Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, what Layla Hormozi was talking about, and I looked to all of them to see, okay, that's what it takes, and also that is what worked my entire life. I had always hustled from the very beginning. Starting in school, very much, if you're a straight A student, you can relate to this. If you were a straight A student, you can relate to this. You get praise, you get the gold stars, the grades, the honors, the trophies, and everything with that hustle. And I took this to an extreme, growing up in a sense with part-time jobs and full-time jobs during the summer and extra school credits and dance classes that were taking up as much as my part-time job. And it was an intense hustle that we wear as a badge of honor. It's virtuous. It gives us our self-worth, having that intense hustle. So with business, I took this. I took, okay, this is what it takes. And this is what has worked before. This is what got me to medical school. This is what got me through medical school. This is what got me to that month volunteering in India on my own. That's what it takes. And this is what I'm going to replicate. And working with my first couple coaches, this is what they idolized as well. So I totally went into that kind of way of being. So waking up at 5 a.m. So actually it was 4:45 to give myself 15 minutes to open my eyes, brush my teeth and everything. And then the working out, the meditating, the journaling, and then working 12-hour days. It would usually be from 7 to 7. I'd have like multiple work days in a day type thing. That was the idea. And then that was 5 days a week. And then I would do a couple hours during the weekend, usually on a Saturday, and I would take Sundays off. Not mentally off, but I wouldn't do anything usually. So I totally bought into this. And the thing was that it worked. Right? I did have momentum in my business. I did succeed many, many ways in my business. And it worked until it didn't. Because you see, there was this moment a couple years in when it was like someone had just turned the off button on me. And I couldn't do it anymore. Before, I was able to always push harder, force myself to do it, tell myself, don't be lazy. Come on, let's do this. Do you want it enough? And I would force myself to go and do it. But there was a moment where I just couldn't anymore. It felt unreal. I felt restless. My burnout increased, brain fog was out of this world, couldn't put a thought together. There was a lot of resentment. There was no more joy, no more creativity. And although I did try to go back to my assumption, if I'm stuck, the answer must be more effort. If I'm stuck, that just means I'm being lazy. If I'm stuck, I just need to push harder. But that wasn't working anymore. That wasn't an operating system I could continue doing. And it took me a long time, I would say even 2 years, to work through this, to work through what is the problem? Why can't I do what I've done for 30 years previously? Why can't I function and work the way that I worked before? Does that mean I no longer am able to be successful? Does that mean I'm no longer ambitious? Because that's what it felt like. It felt like I'd lost my ambition, which has always been very high. And I thought it was kind of over. But during those 2 years, I realized that hustle was only built to perform up to a point. It's the ignition, but it doesn't keep the engine running long term. If we try, we'll just run the engine into the ground. There's a certain point where more effort doesn't equal more results. And this was something that I had to do a deep dive in, and this is what we're going to be talking about on this episode, because it is so difficult, especially for those of us born in the 1990s, even 80s. You caught that. We grew up during this time where hustle culture was idealized. We were indoctrinated with it. And it took so long to undo this, because the whole thinking was this is what it takes to succeed. And if you're an ambitious woman, this is what it takes. So either buy into it or leave the game. And learning that there is a different way of doing this, equally valid and more in tune, more aligned with how women function, how we women function, what we need to succeed at those high levels, that took a lot of undoing, essentially, because it was so internally operating system. So the lesson for me wasn't that hustle doesn't work. It wasn't that I wasn't failing. It was that the model I was using had reached the end of the road. It's that hustle has an expiration date, but nobody ever tells women when that date arrives. So hustle culture started off in the 1990s and early 2000s with the entrepreneurial boom, especially in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley at that time had a very much work-oriented, all-in, work-hard mentality, right? And it's beyond work-hard mentality that was in the beginning, in the West, especially, that pushed forward the American dream, right? It goes beyond that. With Silicon Valley, what we saw for the first time in history was an all-consuming, intense work culture. Now, Silicon Valley became a model or blueprint for the entire economy. So that idea got spread. It went from Silicon Valley and spread outwards and became essentially the modus operandi for anybody that was super ambitious and wanted to succeed. If you want to succeed, that's what it takes, right? So those of us that were born early enough to catch this time were indoctrinated with this mentality. And we wore it as a badge of honor. It was virtuous. We got our self-worth from it. But the issue is that then it became our identity. It is who we are. What happens when something is who you are? That means that has reached your operating system. We cannot do anything that is out of line with who we are, how we see ourselves, with our identity. And that's why I moved past early in my business, I moved past coaching that was surface level. Okay, let's just fix perfectionism, or let's just fix, your imposter syndrome, or let's just give you a bit more confidence, because I saw that it's a deep thing. It's identity. You can't force yourself just to change your actions, right? That'll take for a couple of days. If you're really strong, really determined, it'll take for a couple months, maybe even a year, and then that will stop, because it is so much effort to do something opposite to your identity. And that's what I focus on now. So when hustle culture became part of our identity, that is de facto how we were constantly functioning. We couldn't get off that wheel. Now, again, this wouldn't be a problem if hustle culture wasn't a problem. And this is where we get a lot of pushback, because as ambitious women, well, that's what it takes. They could do it. Why can't I? I'm just not strong enough. I'm just not tough enough. But the thing is, here's the main point. We're going to go into why, is that past a certain point, more hustle actually gives you less output, worse health, and especially for women, a higher risk of dropping out before you ever get to your true potential. Here's that thing. You can get super high. You can get, to close to the top of your field, but that's not your true potential. You can go even farther, but you can't do it with this operating system. You can't do it with hustle. You do it by leaning into your biology, your way of doing things. Now, let's first start off with destroying the fact that more hours means more success. It has been repeatedly proven that past about 50 hours, you actually have diminishing returns. So we've seen this both in economics research, and productivity research, and psychology research. We've seen this in so many different fields of research, that once you pass a certain threshold, your output stops rising proportionally. So each extra hour actually produces less and less. Beyond about 50, 55 hours, you almost get nothing extra for the time invested. And we keep seeing this research over and over again. This goes directly against, if I just push harder, I'll get ahead. Now, what's next is that when we do these long hours, they are a health hazard. So we see the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization are calling long hours, which is more than 55 hours per week, a major occupational risk factor. So what happens, this increases your risk of stroke, increases your chance of heart disease. So people who work more than 55 hours have a 35% higher risk of stroke and a 17% higher risk of dying from heart disease, compared with people who work 35 to 40 hours per week. More than this, though, we see a rise with long hours with hustle. We see anxiety. We see depression. We see guilt. We see apathetic attitudes. We see toxic positivity, which means that you push yourself so hard, there's no room for failure. So even minor mistakes are seen as catastrophic. And we know that all of these things, right, if you are connected, you have anxiety, depression affects your sleep, affects your work. Your literal risk of stroke and heart disease will affect your ability to work. The body always keeps the score. We can only push so far before our body says no more, I'm done. So the mentality of I can take it, I'm strong, I'm tough, look at me go, narrative of hustle culture is in direct conflict with global health data. We literally see the opposite. Now, I know right away you're thinking what I was thinking. Okay, sure, but look at all those people who have made it by hustling, right? Look at Jeff Bezos, look at Leila Hormozi, look at Elon Musk, look at all these people. Don't tell me hustle doesn't work. And that was the big thing that was holding me back. That was the big thing that was sort of like a worm in my brain, preventing me from moving forward. I'm going to address that right away so we can move past it. We're going to pull apart that idea because it is wrong. Now, the next thing we see is that shorter weeks actually give us better results. So in studies that have been done on 4-day experiments, so instead of a 5-day week, a 4-day week, we see that productivity stayed the same or improved. Not just this, revenue stayed broadly the same, but burnout dropped 71%. 71% burnout dropped. And we know, I'm sure you've experienced burnout. When I was in medical school, I went through just cycles of intense hustle, intense work, and then a couple weeks of burnout where all I could do was eat chocolate, lie on the couch. And I think how much would I have achieved had I not had those weeks of burnout? So burnout drops by 71%. Mental health improves. The participants felt more productive. And Microsoft, that tried this in Japan, a 4-day work week, reported actually 40% higher productivity. All of these trials go to say that when you protect your time and energy, you don't just survive work, you perform better. That's the exact opposite of hustle logic. So much so that I'm going to repeat this again. When you protect time and energy, when you protect your time and energy, you don't just survive work, you perform better, which is the opposite of hustle logic. So in terms of protecting your time and energy, when you have scheduled in off periods, they actually support performance. So there's a whole stream of psychological detachment of work research, which is talking about mentally switching off after you stop working, which is something that is really hard when you're running your business, especially if you're, let's say, running your business from your home. And then those lines are blurred. And when am I off? When am I not off? So when you are able to detach after work, research shows you have better recovery, less stress, less exhaustion, and higher overall well-being. What that means is that the next day you can come back stronger. You're not showing up the next day at 50% battery. You've recharged. So that supports better performance, that supports better output. And for people who are intrinsically motivated, so that's you're intrinsically motivated, psychological detachment, this ability to switch off, is linked to higher creativity and stronger engagement at work. So for high-performing people, so here the type A ambitious woman listening to this podcast, the science is very sharp and very blunt. It shows that the ability to shut off after work is not a luxury, it's a performance strategy. Your brain does some of its best work outside the grind. Also think about this. If you are constantly absorbing your data, your analytics, you are constantly putting output, right? You're on social media, or you're creating your courses, or you're on client calls. If you're constantly doing, when are you learning? When are you absorbing new information that can move you forward? So not only are you not taking the time to recover, which will increase your creativity, increase your productivity, but you are not getting any new ideas that can move you forward. That just means that you're constantly doing the same thing. More effort with the same strategy, more effort with the same way of doing and being will get you farther. When really, how about looking to the right, looking to the left, and saying, oh, hey, there's this new way. There's this completely different way. Here's the third path that Sonia's talking about. Different way of being that can get me to where I want to go faster and better and being healthier rather than just this forceful push that's frankly making me restless, and I already feel that something's wrong with it. Now, all of this that I've been talking about with the research, it is both for men and women. But this especially matters for women. This is not generic anti-hustle for everyone. The thing is that global data shows us that women are more likely to experience burnout, depression, and anxiety than men, especially considering that women have unpaid work as well. Especially if you're a mom, you have the whole caregiving, you have everything that's going on at home. Often you're the project manager, social activities manager, event planner, travel planner, extended family caregiving. You have all these unpaid work activities in addition to the paid entrepreneurial business that you run. So when we're here talking about overwork is not gender neutral. Everything that we're talking about, everything that I've mentioned so far, women are actually paying more for it. We're paying more for the effort, for our ambition. It's hitting us harder. So if we take all of this together, we are taking everything from, we're combining occupational health research, productivity economics, organizational psychology, gender and leadership research, and we're combining all this. And what we see is the combination of you have diminishing returns past 55 hours. You have health risks of long hours. You have the heart disease, stroke, anxiety, depression, stress, burnout, all of which will then affect your ability to work. You also have performance benefits of recovery and shorter weeks and mental detachment. On top of this, you see that burnout disproportionately has an impact on women. And when we see all of this together, we know that long hours hurt performance. We know burnout hits women harder. We know rest will improve performance. Why are we still teaching women that more hustle is the only way to succeed? Again, I go back to what we've talked about previously. This is a male model that works for men. It was never made for women. Silicon Valley in the 90s and 2000s was dominated by men, by the male model, male way of functioning, a 24-hour cycle rather than a 28-day cycle. Again, just going by the fact that we have succeeded with hustle just goes to show that massive strength. Now, we're going to go into, okay, well, what about Jeff Bezos? What about Gary Vee? What about Elon Musk? What about them, right? They succeeded. They say that's what it takes. But again, these are one men, two outliers. They are not operating instructions. How many people hustled as hard as them, but did not succeed? And this is a very tricky part where we see and confuse correlation with causation. This is the biggest myth and I find the biggest thing holding hustle culture still within us, because we see these people working insane hours and they succeeded. And we assume the first caused the second, but we don't know what else contributed. We don't know about timing, about privilege, access to capital, early networks, being in the right industry at the right moment, their tolerance for risk, teams who did invisible labor, and a big one, domestic and childcare support. So who is taking care of their life outside of that, outside of their business, right? What support systems do they have in place so they can focus those 80 hours on work? Because everybody needs clean laundry. Everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs a semi-clean household. Everybody needs to get from point A to point B. Who's taking care of those things? Who is putting in the time, the mental load to have all that in place? When we look at it, these icons are mostly male, they're mostly child-free, and they are heavily supported. They usually have a spouse or partner covering all these domestic labor duties. And these companies have been built inside systems that were designed for men's biology, their rhythms, their norms. It is different for women. It is not less than, it is not worse, it is just different. And it is time for us to function in a system that is meant for us. That doesn't mean changing the system, that means changing how we function, how we operate, changing our modus operandi, changing our identity to be in line with the best way for us to succeed. And don't forget what I mentioned earlier, the women operate under double workload economics. We have paid and unpaid labor. This doubles our burnout risk. Remember, if you're burnt out, you're done. You're on zero functioning. You're on the couch. You're not moving anywhere. That's what burnout is. So the real question is, should we ambitious women model our businesses on someone whose entire life is structured and their biology is structured to make 120-hour weeks possible? If the playing field is different, the strategy must be too. And don't forget that even these icons eventually pay the cost. How many of them have successful relationships? How many of them are still with the same people? Musk now openly talks about sleep deprivation and his relationship failings. Jeff Bezos now is saying sleep is one of his top 3 business priorities. Gary Vee is now emphasizing rest, long game, joy, and happiness. Very different from 10 years ago. So once they all moved away from hustle. This tells us that hustle works until it doesn't. Like I said in the very beginning, it could be the ignition to get you going, but it will run your engine to the ground if you continue using it. So we're very much seeing the benefits of stepping off, and not just the benefits of stepping off, but for women, we are seeing that when we step off the hustle culture game and we put into its place an operating system that actually works for a woman based on her identity, based on her biology, you succeed faster. You succeed when your execution matches your actual energy, your strengths, your season, your identity. When your strategy matches all of these things, and when you stop leaking power, trying to force yourself into someone else's operating system. And that's the kind of stuff that I do with my clients. And it's so rewarding looking at women who have been operating in one operating system for so long and have succeeded. But you get to a point when you know, I'm running myself into the ground. There has to be a better way. This just doesn't work. Because the thing is that your power was never in how hard you can push. You've already proven repeatedly that you can push very hard. Instead, your power is in how precisely you know where to put your energy for maximum output and when to pull it back. That's the feminine evolution. That's what we're talking about with feminine leadership. And it's not the rejection of ambition. It's the precision for feminine biology, for female biology, for our way of functioning, for your specific identity, not the identity that was forced upon you, the one that you adopted in order to survive, in order to succeed, in order to get the things in the life that you want in a male dominated society. No, the identity that you started off with, the identity that originally created the dream that you have for your life, because it is that identity, not the forced made one later, but it is that original one that is capable of achieving that identity. That is why it is so important to go back to it, to go back to who you actually are before the world told you who you need to be to succeed. She is the one that is able to achieve everything. And I can bet you anything, she is not hustling all the live long day. She is not pushing. She is not belittling herself. She is not calling herself lazy, undisciplined. She is not forcing, pushing, molding. She is sitting sovereign. She has a sovereign identity. And that is the way we move forward. That is the third path. That is feminine leadership.